I never imagined becoming the bride who brought her fiancé to his knees, not in marriage, but in handcuffs. But as he stood at the altar surrounded by Manhattan's elite, I walked down the aisle with evidence that would not only destroy our wedding, but his entire career. Sometimes karma needs a perfectly timed push, and I was about to give it one. Before we begin this story of justice served at the altar, I want to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these tales of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Now, let's dive in. Alexander Blackwood and I had been together for 4 years. He was everything I thought I wanted. Brilliant, charismatic, and seemingly devoted to philanthropic causes, just like my family. As the CFO of a major investment firm, he impressed everyone with his financial acumen and apparent dedication to ethical banking. He'd carefully cultivated a reputation as the golden boy of Wall Street who still had a heart, speaking at charity galas about corporate responsibility while managing billions in ethical investment funds. My father, who ran one of the city's largest charitable foundations, had taken Alexander under his wing almost immediately after we started dating. "Emma," he'd said, "this one understands that wealth comes with responsibility." Within a year, Alexander was treasurer of our family's foundation, managing the funds that helped thousands of underprivileged children access education and healthcare. My father's trust in him seemed absolute, and why wouldn't it be? Alexander had all the right credentials, all the perfect references, and a seeming dedication to making the world better that matched our family's mission. My mother had passed away when I was young, but my Aunt Victoria had stepped in to help raise me, becoming the maternal figure I desperately needed. She too had fallen under Alexander's spell, often remarking how he reminded her of my late father in his younger years. Ambitious, but with a moral compass that never wavered. "He'll make an excellent addition to the family," she'd say, squeezing my hand at our Sunday brunches. My cousin Mia, who became one of my closest confidants and bridesmaids, was the only one who occasionally raised an eyebrow at Alexander's perfect facade. "Nobody's that flawless, Emma," she'd say, but I'd dismissed her concerns as simple jealousy. Our romance had been a fairy tale from the start, the kind that made it into the society pages of the New York Times. The wealthy, ethical banker and the charity foundation heiress. A match that seemed destined by the stars. When he proposed on a private yacht under the Hamptons summer stars, the photos went viral in our social circle. "Power couple seals the deal," the headlines read. The ring he'd chosen was a family heirloom from the Blackwood collection. Or so he'd claimed. Like everything else about Alexander, I would later discover even this was a carefully crafted lie. The Plaza Hotel was booked for what magazines were already calling the wedding of the year. 300 of New York's elite would witness our union, with the governor himself planning to attend. The guest list read like a who's who of Manhattan society: CEOs, philanthropists, politicians, and old money families who rarely ventured out except for the most prestigious occasions. Alexander had insisted on handling all the financial arrangements himself, a gesture I'd found touching at the time. "You focus on being beautiful," he'd said with that $1,000,000 smile that had first caught my eye at a Met Gala 4 years ago. The wedding planning had consumed the last year of our lives. Every detail was meticulously chosen to reflect both our personal taste and our social status. The flowers would be flown in from Holland, the champagne from a private vineyard in France, and the cake designed by a pastry chef who'd worked for actual royalty. My dress was a custom creation from a designer whose waiting list was typically 3 years long. Alexander had connections everywhere, it seemed, always able to make the impossible happen with just a phone call and that charismatic smile. I never planned to discover the truth. It was an accident, the kind of chance discovery that shatters your world in an instant. 2 days before the wedding, Alexander left his laptop open in his study while attending a last-minute foundation meeting. I'd stopped by to leave some papers for him to sign. final details for the wedding insurance he'd insisted upon. I only meant to close the laptop when an email notification caught my eye. Offshore transfer complete. Exit strategy confirmed. 6 words that would unravel everything. My hands trembled as I read email after email, document after document. The man I was about to marry had been systematically embezzling from my family's foundation for years. Millions meant for children's hospitals and education programs sat in Cayman Island accounts. But what turned my blood to ice was his exit strategy, a detailed plan to divorce me exactly 8 months after our wedding, once he had full access to the foundation's main accounts. The timing wasn't random. It coincided perfectly with a planned merger of our foundation with a larger international charity, a move that would give the foundation's treasurer, Alexander, unprecedented access to even larger funds. "Emma's naivety is our greatest asset," he'd written to his co-conspirator, a hedge fund manager I'd never trusted. "Once we're married, her trust will give us unfettered access. The foundation's security protocols are a joke. They still believe in the power of family. Her father's old-world values about trust and loyalty make this almost too easy." Standing in his perfectly organized study, surrounded by photos of our perfect life, I felt something inside me change. The naive heiress who believed in fairy tales died, and in her place, something stronger emerged. A woman who would make sure justice was served, not just for herself, but for every family whose donations Alexander had stolen. Every child who might have received life-saving treatment, every student who might have gotten a scholarship, every dream he'd crushed with his greed, they all deserved justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alexander had taught me everything. About forensic accounting during our late-night discussions about the foundation's operations. "Know your numbers, Emma," he'd say, walking me through complex financial trails and security measures. In our world, numbers tell the real story. Now, I would use that knowledge to expose his crimes. He'd given me the weapons for his own destruction, teaching a wolf in sheep's clothing while never imagining the sheep might have teeth of her own. I had 48 hours until I was supposed to walk down the aisle. But I had other plans for this wedding, plans that would give new meaning to the phrase, "till death do us part." Only in this case it wouldn't be death that parted us, but the long arm of the law. Little did Alexander know, as he sat in his meeting planning our future, that his bride-to-be was about to orchestrate the greatest takedown the city's social circle had ever witnessed. The Plaza Hotel would indeed host an unforgettable event, just not the one anyone was expecting. As I closed his laptop and straightened my shoulders, I could almost hear the ticking of the clock, counting down not to my wedding, but to Alexander's downfall. My hands didn't shake as I closed Alexander's laptop and gathered my thoughts. Years of watching my father handle foundation crises had taught me one thing. Emotion could wait. Action couldn't. I had 48 hours to unravel a fraud that had taken years to orchestrate, and I needed every minute. First, I needed allies. I could trust completely, not my father. His heart condition meant I had to protect him from the immediate shock. Not Aunt Victoria. Her position on the foundation's board could compromise her legally if she knew and didn't report it immediately. No, I needed someone with both the skills and the distance to help me execute what needed to be done. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd never thought I'd use. "Mia, remember that favor you owe me from the Geneva incident? I need to cash it in, now." My cousin had gone from party girl to one of the FBI's top forensic accountants, though our family still thought she worked for a regular accounting firm. Only I knew her true profession, after accidentally running into her during an undercover operation in Switzerland last year. "I'm on my way," she said, no questions asked. That's what I loved about Mia. She understood the meaning of family, loyalty, the real kind, not the facade Alexander had perfected. While waiting for Mia, I began photographing everything on Alexander's laptop. Years of being the foundation's public face had taught me the importance of documentation. Each damning email, every fraudulent transfer, all the carefully hidden accounts. I captured everything. My hands moved mechanically, my mind oddly clear, despite the betrayal burning in my chest. Mia arrived within 30 minutes, her usual designer clothes replaced by what she called her work outfit. All black, with a laptop bag that probably contained more surveillance equipment than computer parts. "Tell me," was all she said as she settled into Alexander's study. For the next hour, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The systematic theft from the foundation, the planned post-wedding heist, the elaborate network of offshore accounts. Mia's face grew darker with each detail, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she dug deeper into Alexander's digital footprint. "Emma," she finally said, looking up from her screen, "this goes way beyond just your foundation. I'm seeing connections to at least 3 other charitable organizations. Alexander's been running this scheme for years, using different identities, different companies. The Alexander Blackwood, you know. He doesn't really exist. The revelation hit me like a physical blow." "What do you mean?" "Alexander Blackwood died 15 years ago, a baby who didn't survive childbirth. Someone acquired his identity, built an elaborate backstory. The man you're about to marry? He's a professional con artist, one we've been trying to catch for years." Mia turned her laptop toward me, showing me a series of photos. Alexander with different names, different lives, different fiancés. He specializes in charitable organizations, using marriage as his way in. "You're not his first target, Emma, but I promise you, you'll be his last." The ice in my veins crystallized into something harder. "Tell me what I need to do." Mia's plan was methodical, precise, and absolutely devastating. We would need every minute of the next 48 hours to pull it off. First, she made some calls to her FBI colleagues, but not to arrest Alexander. Not yet. "We need to catch him in the act," she explained, "and your wedding provides the perfect opportunity. Next, we needed to secure the evidence without alerting Alexander that we'd discovered his scheme." Mia installed a sophisticated tracking program on his laptop, making sure it looked exactly as he'd left it. "He's good with computers," she warned, "but I'm better." As dawn broke over Manhattan, we moved to Phase 2. I had a breakfast scheduled with my bridesmaids at the plaza. The perfect cover for what we really needed to do. While I maintained appearances, giggling over mimosas and discussing last-minute details, Mia and her team worked invisibly in the background, setting up the elaborate sting that would unfold at my wedding. "The timing has to be perfect," Mia explained during a stolen moment in the hotel's powder room. "We'll have agents positioned as guests, hotel staff, even the photography team. But the key is to let him think everything's proceeding exactly as he planned." The hardest part was maintaining normalcy. I attended my final dress fitting, smiled through the rehearsal dinner, and played the role of excited bride while carrying the weight of betrayal in my heart. Alexander remained his charming self, completely unaware that each loving gesture, each tender kiss, was being documented as evidence of his fraud. "You seem quiet, darling," he remarked during our rehearsal dinner at Le Bernardin. His hand covered mine, the same hand that had typed out detailed plans to destroy my family's legacy. "Just wedding nerves?" I squeezed his hand and gave him my best loving smile, the same way he'd been faking sincerity for 4 years. "Just can't believe it's finally happening," I replied. And at least that part wasn't a lie. Something was finally happening, just not what he expected. That night, alone in my penthouse while Alexander stayed at his bachelor party, I reviewed the final details of our plan with Mia. The FBI had frozen all of Alexander's known accounts, but in a way that wouldn't alert him until it was too late. They'd traced his connections to 3 other charitable foundations, uncovering a pattern of fraud that spanned nearly a decade. "We found his other victims," Mia said softly, showing me files of women who'd come before me. Heiresses, philanthropists, all women dedicated to making the world better, all betrayed by the same man under different names. Some of them lost everything. Their foundations collapsed, Their reputations ruined. He's destroyed lives, Emma. Looking at their faces, I felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. It was about justice for every woman whose trust he'd betrayed, every charitable cause he'd undermined, every life he'd impacted with his greed. Tomorrow, I said, my voice steady, we end this. Not just for me, but for all of them. Mia nodded, understanding the weight of what we were about to do. The officers are in position. The evidence is ironclad. When you walk down that aisle, tomorrow, you're not just saving your foundation. You're stopping him from ever doing this again. As I prepared for bed that night, my wedding dress hanging pristinely by the window, I thought about the vows I'd been planning to make. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. Alexander had twisted those sacred promises into weapons, using them to steal not just money, but hope from the causes his victims had dedicated their lives to supporting. Tomorrow, I would keep a different kind of vow. A promise to every woman who'd trusted and lost, every charity that had been betrayed, every vulnerable person who'd been denied help because of his greed. The Plaza Hotel would witness a ceremony, all right, but not the kind that ended with "I do." It would end with justice. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect October day that Manhattan socialites dream about for their big events. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Plaza Hotel suite, catching the diamonds on my engagement ring, diamonds that, like everything else about Alexander, probably had a darker story behind their sparkle. My hands didn't shake as I sipped my morning coffee, scanning the final confirmation messages. From Mia, everything was in place. The FBI agents were positioned throughout the hotel, some disguised as waitstaff, others as guests in tailored designer outfits that would blend perfectly with our social circle. The evidence was secured, the timing choreographed down to the minute. The photographer just arrived, Mia texted. He's one of our best undercover agents. Every moment will be documented, not just for your society pages, but for our case file. My bridal suite soon filled with the traditional wedding day chaos. My bridesmaids arrived in a flutter of silk robes and champagne bottles, their excitement genuine since only Mia knew what was really about to unfold. My makeup artist worked her magic while my hairstylist created an intricate updo that would look perfect in both wedding photos and mugshot backgrounds. Emma, darling, Aunt Victoria, swept into the room, already dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. You look absolutely radiant. She held out a familiar blue velvet box. Something borrowed, your mother's pearl earrings. She wore them on her wedding day. The pearls felt heavy in my hands, weighted with family history and expectations. My mother had been known for her integrity, her dedication to truth and justice. Looking in the mirror as I fastened them to my ears, I saw her strength reflecting back at me. She would have understood what I was about to do. The guests are arriving, one of my bridesmaids announced, peeking through the suite's window at the growing crowd below. Manhattan's elite stepped from their luxury cars, dressed in their finest, completely unaware they were about to witness something far more dramatic than a society wedding. My father arrived next, looking distinguished, in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. "Princess," he said, using his childhood nickname for me. "You look just like your mother." The comparison made my throat tight. I hadn't told him about Alexander's betrayal, about the Foundation's stolen millions. His heart condition meant I had to protect him from the shock, at least for a few more hours. "Daddy," I said, straightening his bow tie. "You know I love you, right? And that everything I do is to protect our family's legacy?" He looked at me curiously, but before he could respond, my wedding planner burst in. "It's time for the final touches. Everyone but the bride and her maid of honor, out." As the room cleared, Mia locked the door and quickly pulled out her phone. "Final update," she whispered. "Alexander's in position. He has no idea about the frozen accounts yet. The arrest warrant is ready. Are you absolutely sure about the timing? I nodded, checking my reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror looked every bit the perfect bride. Designer gown flowing like a waterfall of silk and lace, makeup flawless, eyes bright with anticipation. Only I knew that anticipation wasn't for the traditional wedding march. What? About his accomplices, I asked, thinking of the hedge fund manager and others mentioned in those damning emails, all under surveillance. The moment you give the signal, we move on everyone simultaneously. This isn't just taking down Alexander, we're dismantling his entire network. A knock at the door made us both jump. 10 minutes until showtime, the wedding planner called out. Mia squeezed my hand. The evidence files are in place, remember? Wait for my signal before you reach for them. We need him to make his move first. I touched my mother's pearl earrings for strength. He won't suspect anything until it's too late. His ego won't let him imagine that his naive bride could orchestrate his downfall. The next few minutes passed in a blur of final adjustments and well wishes. My veil was secured, my bouquet of white roses and peonies placed in my hands. Each flower had been carefully chosen for its symbolism, white for purity, but also for truth coming to light. Through the doors, I could hear the string quartet beginning the prelude music. 300 guests waited in the plaza's grand ballroom, which Alexander had insisted on booking instead of a church. More dramatic, he'd said with that characteristic smile. He had no idea just how dramatic it would become. Places. Everyone. The wedding planner's voice carried through the corridor. My bridesmaids lined up in their flowing silk gowns, each one a perfect shade of midnight blue, the same color as the FBI windbreakers hidden strategically throughout the hotel. My father appeared at my side, offering his arm. Ready to become Mrs. Blackwood? He asked, his voice full of pride and love. I took his arm, feeling the weight of the hidden evidence file secured in my bouquet's handle. Actually, Daddy, I have something else in mind. The doors to the grand ballroom opened, revealing the elaborate scene beyond. White roses and crystal chandeliers created a fairy tale setting, with hundreds of Manhattan's most influential people turned in their seats to watch the bride's entrance. At the end of the aisle, Alexander stood tall and handsome in his custom tuxedo, that practiced smile firmly in place. Little did he know, in less than 15 minutes, that smile would shatter along with his carefully constructed facade. As the first notes of the wedding march began to play, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. This walk down the aisle wouldn't end with "I do." It would end with "You're under arrest." The game was about to begin, and for once, Alexander wasn't the one controlling the pieces. Each step down the aisle felt like a heartbeat, measured and purposeful. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon, just as we'd rehearsed, but to me, it sounded more like a countdown. 300 of Manhattan's elite watched my progression, their faces glowing with the kind of satisfaction that comes from witnessing the perfect society wedding. If only they knew what they were really about to see. Alexander's smile grew wider as I approached, that million-dollar expression that had charmed its way into my life 4 years ago. He looked every inch the successful Wall Street prince in his Tom Ford tuxedo, his golden cufflinks catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Those cufflinks had been a gift from my father, another symbol of trust about to be shattered. In the front row, I caught sight of the hedge fund manager, mentioned in Alexander's emails, Thomas Sterling, looking uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored suit. He shifted slightly when our eyes met, perhaps sensing something amiss in my expression. Next to him sat other members of Alexander's sophisticated fraud network, all dressed in their finest, all about to discover that their house of cards was minutes from collapse. 2 steps from the altar, I saw my father dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief, his pride evident in every movement. Aunt Victoria sat beside him, beaming with maternal joy. The sight of them made my heart clench, knowing how the next few minutes would rock their world. But sometimes protecting those you love means delivering hard truths. One final step. Alexander reached for my hand, his touch confident and possessive. "You look stunning," he whispered, his voice carrying just far enough to make several nearby guests sigh romantically. I gave him my most radiant smile, the one I'd practiced in front of my mirror all morning. "You have no idea what's coming," I whispered back, my tone still honey-sweet. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but his professional mask stayed firmly in place. The officiant cleared his throat, ready to begin the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." "Actually," I interrupted, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "before we begin, I have something to share." I turned to face our audience, feeling Alexander's hand tense in mine. A different kind of vow, you might say. From within my bouquet, I extracted the evidence file Mia had helped me prepare. The roses parted perfectly. We'd practiced this moment for hours. "You see, 2 days ago, I discovered something interesting on my fiancé's laptop." Alexander's grip on my hand tightened painfully. "Emma," he said through clenched teeth, "what are you doing?" I pulled my hand free, opening the file with deliberate slowness. "Would anyone like to hear about the systematic theft of millions from children's charities? Or perhaps about the elaborate plan to steal even more after today's ceremony?" The ballroom erupted in murmurs. In the front row, Thomas Sterling was already trying to slip away, only to find his path blocked by a waiter, or rather, an FBI agent in waiter's clothing. "Emma, please." Alexander's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "We can talk about this." "Talk?" I turned to face him, my voice crystal clear in the now silent room. "Like how you talked about me in those emails. What was it you said? Emma's naivety is our greatest asset." Color drained from Alexander's face as I continued. "Or should we talk about Sarah Thompson from the Chicago Children's Foundation? Or Patricia Miller from the Seattle Education Trust? How many other women's lives have you destroyed with this same scheme?" The murmurs grew louder. Phones appeared in guests' hands, recording every moment. Perfect. The more witnesses, the better. "I can explain," Alexander started, reaching for the file in my hands, but I was ready for this move. "Now, Mia," I called out. My cousin stood up from her bridesmaid position, her FBI badge already in hand. Throughout the ballroom, other guests and staff members revealed their true identities, moving with practiced precision to secure the exits and surround Alexander's known accomplices. "Alexander Blackwood," Mia announced, her professional tone cutting through the chaos. "Or should I say, James Morrison, Peter Reynolds, and whatever other aliases you've used. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft." The look on Alexander's face as 2 agents approached with handcuffs was everything I'd imagined and more. The practiced charm crumbled, replaced by something ugly and desperate. He lunged for me, perhaps hoping to use me as leverage. But years of self-defense training, another detail about me he'd underestimated, came in handy. I sidestepped smoothly, letting him stumble past me into the waiting arms of the FBI agents. "You bitch," he snarled, all pretense of sophistication gone. "You have no idea what you've done." I stepped closer, making sure every camera in the room could capture my response. "Actually, I know exactly what I've done. I've stopped you from destroying any more lives, from stealing from any more charities, from betraying any more women who were foolish enough to trust you." As the agents led him away, I turned to address the shocked crowd. "I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary to ensure justice was served. The caterers have been instructed to continue service. Please, enjoy the reception. Consider it a celebration of truth rather than marriage." My father had risen from his seat, his face ashen. I rushed to his side, supporting him as he swayed slightly. "Daddy, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. But the foundation's money is safe. We caught him before he could complete his final transfer." Aunt Victoria wrapped her arms around both of us, her society facade cracking with real emotion. "You brave, brilliant girl," she whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." Around us, the ballroom had erupted into controlled chaos. FBI agents were escorting Thomas Sterling and 3 other accomplices out in handcuffs, while society reporters who'd come expecting to cover a wedding were frantically updating their stories with breaking news of the scandal. Mia approached, still in her bridesmaid dress but now with her FBI badge prominently displayed. "We've already recovered access to most of the offshore accounts," she reported. "And you'll be happy to know we found evidence linking him to at least 12 other attempted scams across the country. He's never getting out of prison." I touched my mother's pearl earrings, feeling their comforting weight. "Good," I said, watching as Alexander was led through the ballroom doors, his perfectly tailored tuxedo now accessorized with shining handcuffs. Some people deserve to wear chains instead of wedding rings. The hours following Alexander's arrest passed in a whirlwind of statements, photographs, and barely contained chaos. The plaza's grand ballroom, which had been decorated for the society, Wedding of the Year, now served as an impromptu command center for the FBI's operation. Agents in evening wear moved efficiently through the crowd, gathering statements from shocked guests while caterers continued serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres as if this had been the planned entertainment all along. My father, after recovering from his initial shock, had taken charge in his characteristic way. Standing tall despite his pale complexion, he addressed the foundation's board members who had been among the wedding guests. "Yes, this is a shock to us all," he declared, his voice steady. "But thanks to Emma's quick thinking and bravery, not a single scholarship will be affected. Not one program will be cut. The foundation remains secure." Aunt Victoria had transformed from tearful wedding guest to fierce protector, running interference with the press who were now swarming the hotel lobby. "The family will release a statement in due time," she repeated firmly, her social connections proving invaluable as she managed the narrative. "For now, we celebrate an act of extraordinary courage and integrity." Mia was in her element, simultaneously coordinating with her FBI team while explaining the operation to key society figures whose support we'd need in the coming days. "We've been tracking this type of charitable organization fraud for years," she explained to a group of influential board members. "Emma's discovery gave us the break we needed to uncover the entire network." In a quiet corner of the ballroom, I sat with Sarah Thompson, one of Alexander's previous victims who had flown in specifically for this operation. She'd lost everything to him 5 years ago: her family's foundation, their reputation, even their historic home. "Watching him in handcuffs," she said, gripping my hand, "it's like I can finally breathe again. You've given all of us our lives back." The evidence we'd gathered proved more damaging than even I had imagined. Alexander's laptop contained details of frauds spanning more than a decade, involving charitable organizations across 3 continents. The sophisticated network he'd built had targeted not just foundations, but the very essence of philanthropic trust. "The scope is staggering," Detective Morrison explained as he showed me the preliminary findings. "Private school endowments, hospital foundations, environmental trusts. Anywhere people were trying to do good, he saw an opportunity to do harm." The detective shook his head in disgust. "Using marriage as a weapon, it's a special kind of evil." My wedding planner, showing remarkable adaptability, had transformed the evening's schedule from celebration to strategy session. The 5-tier wedding cake now served as refreshment for the dozens of law enforcement officials and victims who gathered to share information. The string quartet, perhaps sensing the historical significance of the moment, had switched from wedding classics to more appropriate power ballads. Around 6 o'clock, Mia pulled me aside with breaking news. "We've frozen over 50 million in offshore accounts," she reported, her eyes bright with triumph. "And we found his contingency plans. He was planning similar operations in London and Geneva." Your exposure didn't just stop him here, you've prevented countless future frauds. The magnitude of what we'd accomplished was still sinking in when my father approached, looking years older, but somehow stronger. Princess, he said, using his old nickname for me. Your mother, she would have done exactly the same thing. Standing up for truth, no matter the personal cost. That's the real family legacy. As evening fell over Manhattan, the plaza's ballroom slowly emptied of law enforcement, leaving behind an intimate gathering of family and close friends. The elaborate flower arrangements that had been meant to celebrate love now witnessed a different kind of commitment to truth, justice, and the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. Aunt Victoria found me on the balcony, where I was taking a moment to process the day's events. She draped her cashmere shawl around my shoulders, a gesture so maternal it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. You know, she said, looking out over the city lights, when your mother died, I worried about how we'd maintain her spirit of integrity in the foundation. I needn't have worried. You're her daughter in every way that matters. Inside, I could hear Mia coordinating with international law enforcement agencies. Alexander's arrest had opened a Pandora's box of white-collar crime, revealing connections to fraudulent schemes across the globe. What had started as my personal revenge had evolved into something far more significant, a chance to protect countless charitable organizations from similar predators. The society photographers who had come expecting to capture a fairy tale, wedding instead documented a different kind of historic moment. Their photos would show not a blushing bride saying "I do," but a strong woman saying no more to fraud and deception. The headlines were already rolling in. Bride brings down international fraud ring. Wedding day sting operation exposes. Charitable organization scheme. From wedding march to perp walk, a society scandal. Sarah Thompson approached me again, this time with news that brought fresh tears to my eyes. The evidence you gathered, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. It's enough to clear my family's name. The authorities are already talking about reinstating our foundation's license. After 5 years of disgrace, we can finally rebuild. Looking around the ballroom, at the remains of what should have been my wedding celebration, I felt a profound sense of peace. The white roses, the crystal chandeliers, the elegant place settings, all of it had served a higher purpose than originally intended. Instead of witnessing the union of two people, this room had hosted the reunion of justice with truth. My father joined us on the balcony, his arms strong around my shoulders. What now, princess? He asked softly. This isn't exactly how we planned to spend your wedding night. I touched my mother's pearl earrings, which had witnessed this entire transformation. Now, I replied, we do what our family has always done. We protect those who need protection. We support those who need support. And we make sure that people like Alexander can never abuse philanthropic trust again. The night air was cool on my face as I looked out over the city, still wearing my wedding dress but feeling more like a warrior than a bride. Sometimes, I realized, the most important vows aren't the ones we make to a person, but the ones we make to ourselves, vows of integrity, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth. In the weeks following what the press dubbed the wedding sting, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The morning after Alexander's arrest, I woke up in my apartment overlooking Central Park, still wearing my mother's pearl earrings, to find my face splashed across every major newspaper in the country. Bride brings down billion-dollar fraud. Ring, the New York Times declared. Wedding day justice, how one woman exposed Wall Street's dark secret, read the Wall Street Journal. The investigation into Alexander's network expanded rapidly. What we'd uncovered at the wedding was just the tip of the iceberg. The FBI task force, with Mia at the helm, discovered fraudulent operations spanning 3 continents, involving over 30 charitable organizations. The total amount stolen exceeded $2 billion, making it one of the largest charity fraud cases in history. Alexander's arrest had triggered a domino effect. His accomplices, facing serious prison time, began turning on each other. Thomas Sterling, the hedge fund manager who'd looked so uncomfortable at the wedding, was the first to break. His testimony opened up new avenues of investigation, revealing connections to corrupt banking officials, compromised auditors, and even several prominent political figures. "You've started a revolution in the charitable sector," Mia told me over coffee one morning, her FBI badge now proudly displayed rather than hidden. "Organizations worldwide are reviewing their security protocols. Your story has made everyone realize how vulnerable these institutions can be to sophisticated fraud." My father threw himself into reforming the foundation's governance structure, working closely with international experts to create new safeguards against future fraud attempts. "Your mother always said that trust is precious precisely because it can be broken," he remarked during one late-night strategy session. "Now we'll make sure that trust is protected by more than just good faith." Aunt Victoria, ever the social force, had transformed our family's annual charity gala into a symposium on financial security for charitable organizations. "We're turning this scandal into a force for positive change," she declared, her society connections now serving a greater purpose than just maintaining status. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence we'd gathered. I found myself spending more time in courtrooms than boardrooms, watching as Alexander's carefully constructed world crumbled piece by piece. His lawyer attempted to paint him as a misunderstood businessman, but the evidence told a different story. During one particularly tense day of testimony, I faced Alexander across the courtroom. Gone was the charming smile, replaced by a cold stare that finally matched his true nature. As I detailed his elaborate scheme to the jury, his mask slipped completely. "You think you've won?" he spat during a break in proceedings. "You've destroyed everything we could have built together." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Alexander. I've prevented you from destroying anything else. There's a difference." The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the verdict took only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and money laundering. The judge's sentence was unprecedented: 30 years without possibility of parole, plus full restitution to all victims. "Your crimes," the judge declared, "struck at the heart of charitable giving itself. You didn't just steal money, you stole hope from those who needed it most." Sarah Thompson and the other previous victims were in court for the sentencing. Watching them as the verdict was read, seeing decades of pain lift from their shoulders, I knew that my failed wedding had served a far greater purpose than any marriage could have. The foundation world took notice. I found myself being invited to speak at international conferences, sharing our story as a cautionary tale, but also as a blueprint for protection. The security protocols we'd developed in the wake of the scandal became industry standard, adopted by charitable organizations worldwide. "You've turned a personal tragedy into a global triumph," Sarah told me at one such conference in London. Her own foundation had been restored, its reputation rebuilt on the strength of the evidence we'd uncovered. "Every charity that's now better, protected, every donation that's now more secure, that's your real revenge." 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I stood at a podium addressing the World Charitable Foundation Congress. The audience included representatives from over 100 countries, all there to learn from our experience. My father sat in the front row, beaming with pride, while Aunt Victoria and Mia flanked him, our family unit stronger than ever. "Trust is a double-edged sword," I told the assembled crowd. "It can be our greatest strength or our greatest vulnerability. The key is not to stop trusting, but to trust wisely, to verify thoroughly, and to remember that true philanthropy thrives on transparency." The changes we implemented reached far beyond just financial security. The foundation world underwent a cultural shift, moving away from the old-school approach of trust based solely on social connections and family names. New technologies, stricter oversight, and better communication between organizations created a stronger, more resilient charitable sector. My mother's pearl earrings now sat in a display case at the foundation's headquarters, along with the evidence file that had been hidden in my wedding bouquet. They served as a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't about saying "I do," but about saying, "I will not allow this to happen." The wedding dress that had been meant for a bride became a symbol of transformation. I donated it to a women's empowerment organization, where it was displayed as a reminder that strength often comes in unexpected forms. From wedding gown to warrior's armor, the plaque read, a symbol of choosing truth over comfort, justice over appearance. 1 year after the wedding that became a sting operation, I received a letter from a small foundation in Kenya. They had used our security protocols to identify and prevent a similar fraud attempt. "Your story saved us," the director wrote. "You showed us that one person's courage can protect countless others." That letter joined dozens of others in a new file I kept. Not evidence of crimes, but proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't just about punishing the guilty, but about protecting the innocent. Each letter represented a foundation saved, a charity protected, a mission preserved. Looking back, I realized that Alexander had been right about one thing. I did make history. That day at the plaza. Just not in the way he'd planned. Instead of becoming another victim in his string of conquests, I'd become a catalyst for change, turning a personal betrayal into a movement for global good. 18 months after my wedding day turned into a sting operation, I found myself back at the Plaza Hotel. Not for another wedding, but for the first international conference on charitable organization security, an event that had grown from the ashes of my almost marriage to Alexander. The grand ballroom, once decorated for our wedding, now hosted delegates from over 200 charitable organizations worldwide. Standing at the podium, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The foundation world had undergone a complete transformation with new security protocols and verification systems that made it nearly impossible for someone like Alexander to operate. The Grant Protocol, named after our family foundation, had become the gold standard in charitable organization protection. Security isn't just about protecting money, I told the assembled crowd. It's about protecting hope. Every dollar stolen from a charitable foundation represents a dream denied, a life unchanged, a possibility erased. That's what Alexander and his network really stole. Not just funds, but futures. Mia sat in the front row, now heading the FBI's new Charitable Organizations Fraud Division, a unit created specifically in response to our case. Next to her sat Sarah Thompson, whose restored foundation had become a leading voice in international philanthropy. My father, looking healthier than ever since recovering from the shock of Alexander's betrayal, beamed with pride from his seat beside Aunt Victoria. The changes we'd sparked went far beyond just the charitable sector. The case had exposed weaknesses in international banking regulations, leading to new laws designed to protect philanthropic organizations. Wall Street firms now faced stricter oversight when handling charitable funds, with regular audits and transparency requirements that would have made Alexander's scheme impossible. "Your mother would be so proud," Aunt Victoria said during a break in the conference, adjusting her signature pearl necklace, a gesture that reminded me of my own transformation. "You've turned a personal betrayal into a global movement for good." The exhibition hall outside the ballroom displayed a timeline of the case and its aftermath. Photos, documents, and news clippings told the story of how one bride's discovery had unleashed a wave of reform across the philanthropic world. My wedding dress, donated to the Smithsonian's collection on women's empowerment, was represented by a hologram, rotating slowly beside the actual evidence file that had been hidden in my bouquet. During lunch, Sarah shared updates about the other victims of Alexander's previous schemes. Maria in Barcelona has rebuilt her family's educational foundation, she reported. Patricia's environmental trust in Seattle is thriving again. Every woman he tried to destroy has found her way back, stronger than before. The foundation world had learned its lesson about trust and verification. Trust but verify had become more than just a saying. It was now embedded in the DNA of charitable organizations worldwide. Regular audits, independent oversight boards, and sophisticated tracking systems had replaced the old-world handshake agreements that Alexander had exploited. My father's health had improved dramatically once the initial shock wore off. He'd thrown himself into reforming not just our foundation, but the entire approach to philanthropic governance. "You know what I realized?" he said during our weekly dinner. "Alexander didn't just target our money. He targeted our belief in goodness. By exposing him, you protected something far more precious than funds." The legal aftermath continued to unfold. Alexander's network had proven even more extensive than initially thought. Every month brought new revelations, new arrests, new recoveries of stolen funds. He'd tried to appeal his sentence, claiming entrapment, but the evidence was too overwhelming. His 30-year sentence stood firm. "He's become a case study at Quantico," Mia told me over coffee one morning. "They teach new agents about the wedding sting operation. Your story is literally changing how we train people to fight white-collar crime." The personal healing had taken time. For months after the arrest, I'd questioned every relationship, doubted every new acquaintance. But gradually, with help from family and friends, I'd learned to trust again, this time with wisdom rather than naivety. Aunt Victoria had played a crucial role in my recovery, sharing her own stories of resilience and renewal. "Strength isn't about never being fooled," she'd say during our long talks. "It's about what you do when you discover the truth." The foundation itself had emerged stronger than ever. Our transparency initiatives and security measures had attracted new donors, impressed by our commitment to protecting their philanthropic investments. The children's programs Alexander had targeted were now helping more families than ever before. "You turned his greed into greater good," one of our board members observed during a quarterly meeting. "Every child we help now represents a victory over his attempt to destroy what we built." The wedding industry, surprisingly, had also been affected by our story. Pre-marriage financial investigations became standard practice for high-net-worth couples. Several wedding planners had even created integrity packages that included background checks and financial verifications. My mother's pearl earrings, which had witnessed that transformative day, now rested in a special display at the foundation's headquarters. Beside them lay a simple plaque that read, "Truth is the greatest gift we can give to those who trust us." As the conference drew to a close, I found myself back on the plaza's famous balcony, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. A young woman from a small African foundation approached me, tears in her eyes. "Your story saved our organization," she said softly. "We discovered our own Alexander before he could complete his scheme. Because of you, thousands of children will continue to receive education and care." This, I realized, was the true meaning of revenge, not just stopping one person's crimes, but preventing countless others. Every foundation protected, every donation secured, every charitable mission preserved. These were the real victories. The sun set over Manhattan, casting a golden glow over the city where my almost wedding had transformed into something far more significant. I touched my neck where my mother's pearls had once rested, feeling stronger for their absence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you, but about building something better from the ruins of what was lost. 2 years after the wedding that became a sting operation, I received an unexpected request. Alexander wanted to see me. The letter arrived through his prison counselor, carefully vetted by both the FBI and Mia's team. "He's different now," the counselor wrote. He's been helping us identify other charitable fraud operations. Perhaps it's time for closure. I discussed the request with my family over Sunday dinner, a tradition that had become even more sacred since the events of that fateful day. My father, who had fully recovered and now channeled his energy into expanding the foundation's reach, squeezed my hand. "You don't owe him anything, Princess." "I know," I replied, studying the letter. "But maybe I owe it to myself." Aunt Victoria, ever wise, added her perspective. "Sometimes confronting our past isn't about the other person at all. It's about fully releasing ourselves." She adjusted her signature pearl necklace, a gesture that still reminded me of the earrings I'd worn that day, now displayed at our foundation's headquarters. The federal prison was a far cry from the luxury Alexander had once known. Gone were the custom suits and golden cufflinks, replaced by standard-issue orange. Yet somehow, he still managed to carry himself with that familiar poise. Until he saw me. For the first time, I watched his carefully constructed facade crumble. "Completely." "Emma," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him at the metal visitation table, noting the changes 2 years had wrought. The polished charm was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like authenticity. Almost. "I've been following your work," he continued when I remained silent. "The grant protocol, it's brilliant. You've made it nearly impossible for someone like me to operate in the charitable sector." "That was the point," I replied evenly. He nodded, a ghost of his old smile flickering across his face. "You know what's ironic? All those hours I spent teaching you about financial security, thinking I was just maintaining my cover, I actually gave you the tools to destroy my entire network." "Life has a way of turning things around," I observed. "Why did you want to see me, Alexander? Or should I say James? Peter? Which name are you really?" He flinched at the mention of his aliases. Alexander was real, at least with you, as real as I knew how to be. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been working with the FBI, helping them uncover other operations like mine. Your exposure, it didn't just stop me. It started a domino effect. Major players are falling every week." "I know," I said. "Mia keeps me updated." "Of course she does," he smiled wryly. "Your cousin, the FBI agent. Another detail I missed. I was so focused on the big picture, I missed the small details that ultimately brought me down." A guard passed by doing his rounds, and we fell into momentary silence. Through the prison windows, I could see clouds gathering, promising rain. "How fitting." "The other women," I finally said. "The ones before me. Have you reached out to them?" "Two?" He shook his head. "You're the only one who beat me at my own game. The others, I destroyed them. But you turned destruction into creation. You built something remarkable from the ruins of what I tried to do." "Why did you do it?" The question had haunted me for 2 years. "You had the intelligence, the charm, the connections to succeed legitimately. Why prey on charitable organizations?" Alexander's facade cracked further, showing something that might have been genuine remorse. "Because they were easy targets. People in the charitable world want to believe the best about others. Their trust, it made them vulnerable." He leaned forward slightly. "But you changed that. Now every foundation has safeguards, verification systems, security protocols. You've made the whole sector stronger." "No," I corrected him. "You did that. Your actions forced necessary change. I just made sure your last attempt at destruction became a catalyst for protection instead." He absorbed this, nodding slowly. "I've been teaching other inmates about financial crimes, helping them understand the real impact of white-collar crime, using my experience to prevent others from following my path. It's not redemption, but maybe it's something." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not redemption, but it's better than continuing to cause harm. Rising to leave, I felt a strange sense of peace. The man before me no longer held any power over my emotions. He was just a cautionary tale, a reminder that trust should always be balanced with wisdom. "Emma," he called as I turned to go. "That day, at the plaza, when did you know? When did you realize who I really was?" I looked back at him, remembering the moment in his study when I'd discovered the truth. "I always knew who you were, Alexander. I just finally decided to stop pretending I didn't." Leaving the prison, I stepped into the rain that had finally begun to fall. It felt cleansing, washing away the last lingering threads of what might have been. My phone buzzed with a message from Mia. Another fraud ring had been exposed using our protocols. Another foundation saved, another charitable mission protected. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah Thompson and several other survivors of Alexander's previous schemes. We'd formed a close bond, using our shared experience to help other organizations protect themselves. Over wine and shared stories, we celebrated each new victory, each foundation saved, each mission preserved. "You know what the best revenge turned out to be?" Sarah mused, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Not watching him fall, but watching all of us rise. Every woman he tried to destroy is now stronger, wiser, more powerful than before. We're not victims anymore. We're protectors." Looking around the table at these remarkable women, each of whom had transformed their pain into purpose, I realized Sarah was right. Alexander had tried to use our trust as a weapon against us, but we'd turned that weapon into a shield, protecting countless others from similar fate. The rain continued outside, but inside, surrounded by friendship, strength, and shared purpose, I felt only warmth. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying our enemies, but from transforming their attempts at destruction into something beautiful and strong. My father called as I was heading home, wanting to confirm details for next week's Foundation Board meeting. "You okay, Princess?" he asked, somehow sensing I needed to hear his voice. That couldn't have been easy seeing him. "I'm more than okay," I replied, watching the city lights shimmer through the rain. "I'm free." 3 years after the wedding that never was, life had taken turns I never could have imagined. The Grant Foundation had evolved from a traditional charitable organization into a global leader in philanthropic security and innovation. Our headquarters, once housed in a historic brownstone, now occupied 3 floors of a gleaming Manhattan high-rise with satellite offices in London, Singapore, and Geneva. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office when Mia burst in, her FBI badge glinting in the morning sun. "You're not going to believe this," she announced, dropping a thick file on my desk. "Remember those encrypted files we found on Alexander's backup server? We finally cracked them." The contents were staggering. Alexander's network hadn't just targeted charitable foundations, they'd been building towards something much bigger. The files revealed plans to infiltrate major international aid organizations, including UNICEF and the Red Cross. Our wedding day sting hadn't just stopped a series of frauds. It had prevented a global humanitarian crisis. If these plans had succeeded, Mia explained, pointing to complex financial diagrams, they could have destabilized the entire charitable sector. The ripple effects would have impacted millions of lives worldwide. My father, who had dropped by for our weekly strategy meeting, studied the documents with growing amazement. "Princess," he said, using his old nickname for me, "do you realize what this means? Your instincts that day. You didn't just save our foundation. You saved the entire concept of institutional philanthropy." The revelation sparked a new wave of media interest in our story. The New York Times ran a feature titled "The Wedding That Saved Philanthropy," complete with a detailed analysis of how our security protocols had transformed the charitable sector. Forbes followed with a cover story, "From Jilted Bride to Global." Guardian, "How Emma Grant Revolutionized Charitable Giving." But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Sarah Thompson, who had fully restored her family's foundation, approached me with an ambitious proposal. "We need to think bigger," she said during a late-night strategy session. "What if we created a global network of protected foundations? A united front against fraud?" The idea took root quickly. Within months, we had launched the International Alliance for Philanthropic Protection, IAPP, with our foundation as the cornerstone. Organizations worldwide began adopting our standards, creating a network of transparency and security that made large-scale fraud nearly impossible. Aunt Victoria, who had transformed from society matron to fierce advocate for charitable security, hosted the IAPP's inaugural conference at, of all places, the Plaza Hotel. "Sometimes," she remarked, "as we prepared for the opening ceremony, you have to return to where it all began to truly appreciate how far you've come." Standing in the same ballroom where my wedding had turned into a sting operation, I felt a profound sense of completion. The space that had once been decorated for a celebration of love now hosted a celebration of integrity and protection. Representatives from over 500 charitable organizations filled the room, each committed to our vision of secure, transparent philanthropy. During the conference, we received news that sent ripples through the philanthropic community. Thomas Sterling, Alexander's former accomplice who had turned state's evidence, had written a comprehensive exposé of their operation. The manuscript, which his lawyers had carefully vetted, provided unprecedented insight into how sophisticated fraud networks target charitable organizations. "We're using it as a training manual," Mia explained during her keynote speech. "Understanding their methodology helps us prevent future attacks. It's like having a blueprint of the enemy's fortress." The personal implications of our work continued to unfold in unexpected ways. One morning, I received a letter from a small foundation in Mumbai. They had used our protocols to identify and stop a fraud attempt remarkably similar to Alexander's scheme. "You never met us," the director wrote, "but your story saved everything we built. Because of you, thousands of children will continue to receive education and health care." These letters became more frequent as our influence grew. Each one represented not just a foundation saved, but countless lives protected, dreams preserved, hopes maintained. The ripple effects of that wedding day decision had created waves of positive change across the globe. My father, whose health had fully recovered, took particular pride in how we'd transformed his traditional foundation into a force for global change. "Your mother," he said during a quiet moment at our weekly family dinner. "She always said that true strength comes from protecting others. You've proven her right in ways she never could have imagined." The foundation world had evolved dramatically. The old guard of handshake deals and trust-based transactions had given way to a new era of sophisticated security measures and transparent operations. Yet somehow, this hadn't diminished the spirit of philanthropy. If anything, it had strengthened it by providing donors with confidence that their contributions were truly secure. Sarah and the other survivors of Alexander's previous schemes had become powerful advocates for change in their own right. We formed an informal council, meeting regularly to share insights and strategies. "We're not victims anymore," Sarah often said. "We're guardians, protecting the future of charitable giving." One particularly meaningful project emerged from our collaboration: a mentorship program for women in philanthropic leadership. We shared our experiences, taught security protocols, and helped build a new generation of leaders who understood that trust must be balanced with vigilance. During one of these mentorship sessions, a young foundation director asked me if I regretted not having my fairy tale wedding. Looking around at what we'd built, the global network, the lives protected, the positive change we'd created, I could answer honestly. Some fairy tales end with a wedding. Others end with something far more powerful: a legacy. The rain began to fall outside my office window, much like it had the day I confronted Alexander in prison. But now, instead of feeling cleansing, it felt nurturing, feeding the seeds of change we'd planted in the wake of betrayal. Sometimes, I realized, the best revenge isn't just stopping one person's destruction. It's creating something so strong that destruction becomes nearly impossible. 5 years to the day after my almost wedding, I stood once again in the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom. This time, I wasn't wearing a wedding dress but a tailored business suit, addressing the 5th Annual International Conference on Charitable Security. The room was packed with foundation directors, security experts, and philanthropic leaders from around the world, all part of the movement that had grown from the ashes of Alexander's betrayal. 5 years ago, I stood in this very spot, prepared to make vows that would have enabled one of the largest charitable frauds in history. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. Instead, I made a different kind of vow, a commitment to protect not just one foundation, but all foundations dedicated to making our world better. The changes we'd sparked had exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The Grant Protocol had become the global standard for charitable organization security, adopted by over 5,000 foundations worldwide. Our security network had prevented an estimated $50 billion in attempted fraud, protecting countless charitable missions and the vulnerable people they served. Mia, now the director of the FBI's Charitable Crimes Division, joined me on stage to present the latest statistics. In the past 5 years, we've seen a 92% reduction in large-scale charitable fraud, she announced. The networks we disrupted, starting with Alexander's arrest, have led to over 300 convictions worldwide. The audience included familiar faces: Sarah Thompson, now heading the International Alliance for Philanthropic Protection; my father, whose vision for our foundation had expanded beyond anything we'd imagined; and Aunt Victoria, who had transformed her social connections into a powerful network for positive change. But there were new faces, too. Young foundation directors who had grown up studying our case, security experts who had built careers implementing our protocols, and even some of Alexander's other victims, now strong advocates for charitable protection. The greatest victory, I continued, isn't in what we prevented, but in what we've built. Every foundation saved, every mission protected, every life touched by charitable work that continues uninterrupted. These are the real measures of our success. During the conference break, I received unexpected news. Alexander had written a comprehensive confession from prison, detailing not just his crimes, but the psychological motivations behind them. His manuscript, vetted by prosecutors and psychologists, would be used to train future foundation leaders in identifying and preventing similar schemes. "He'll never be free again," Mia commented as we reviewed the manuscript. "But at least he's finally choosing to contribute something positive to the world." The foundation world had undergone a complete transformation. The old guard's resistance to change had given way to a new era of sophisticated security measures and transparent operations. Yet somehow, this hadn't diminished the spirit of philanthropy. If anything, it had strengthened it by providing donors with absolute confidence in their contributions. My father, watching the proceedings with pride, pulled me aside during lunch. "Your mother would be amazed," he said, his eyes glistening. "Not just by what you stopped, but by what you started. You've created a legacy that will protect charitable giving for generations." The afternoon sessions included a panel of women who had survived similar fraud attempts, each sharing their story of recovery and transformation. Their foundations hadn't just survived, they had thrived, growing stronger and more effective in their missions. "The best revenge," Sarah Thompson observed during the panel, "isn't in destroying those who tried to harm us. It's in building something so strong that harm becomes almost impossible." As evening fell, we gathered for a gala dinner in the same space where my wedding reception should have been. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but it felt right somehow. The room that had been meant to witness one kind of union now celebrated a different kind of partnership, a global alliance dedicated to protecting charitable work. Aunt Victoria, elegant as ever in her signature pearls, raised her glass for a toast. "To Emma," she declared, "who showed us that sometimes the best things in life come not from the dreams we chase, but from the challenges we overcome." Looking around the room at the network we'd built, the protected foundations, the strengthened missions, the preserved dreams, I felt a profound sense of completion. Alexander had tried to use our foundation's trust as a weapon, but we'd transformed that weapon into a shield, protecting countless others from similar fates. The night ended with an unexpected announcement. The United Nations had adopted the grant protocol as its standard for all charitable operations worldwide. Our small act of resistance had grown into a global movement for change. Later that night, standing on the plaza's famous balcony, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The wedding dress that never made it down the aisle was now a permanent exhibition in a museum of women's empowerment. My mother's pearl earrings, which had witnessed that transformative day, had become a symbol of our foundation's commitment to protecting charitable work. Sarah joined me on the balcony, champagne in hand. "You know what I realized?" she said, looking out over the city lights. Alexander thought he was writing a story about conquest. Instead, he became a footnote in a story about protection and empowerment. My phone buzzed with a message from Mia. Another fraud ring had been exposed, using our protocols. Another foundation saved, another mission protected, another community served. These messages had become regular occurrences, each one a reminder of why our work mattered. Sometimes, I told the gathering of international leaders the next morning, the greatest acts of love aren't about saying I do to one person, but about saying I will to a greater purpose. 5 years ago, I chose truth over comfort, protection over pretense. That choice has rippled out in ways none of us could have imagined. The rain began to fall as we concluded the conference, but no one seemed to mind. We had built something, stronger than steel, more transparent than glass, more lasting than any marriage could have been. We had created a legacy of protection that would outlive us all. Looking back at the Plaza Hotel as my car pulled away, I smiled at how life had come full circle. The venue that had been meant to host my wedding had instead witnessed the birth of a global movement. Sometimes, I realized, the best endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we discover when we're brave enough to choose truth over illusion, protection over pretense, and purpose over comfort. 7 years after the wedding, that changed everything, I received a letter that brought our story full circle. It came from a young woman in Singapore, the daughter of a prominent philanthropist. "I almost married someone like Alexander," she wrote. "But then I remembered your story. Because of you, I checked. Because of you, I discovered the truth before it was too late. You saved not just my foundation, but my life." Her letter joined hundreds of others in a special archive we'd created at the foundation's headquarters. Each one told a similar story of fraud prevented, missions protected, lives changed. What had started as my personal act of revenge had evolved into something far more meaningful. A global movement that had fundamentally changed how charitable organizations operated. The Grant Foundation itself had transformed beyond recognition. What was once a traditional family foundation had become the world's leading authority on philanthropic security. Our original Manhattan offices now served as just one hub in a global network that spanned 6 continents. The protocols we'd developed had protected an estimated $100 billion in charitable assets worldwide. My father, now semi-retired but still actively involved in our mission, often reminded me of how far we'd come. "Remember when we thought the Foundation's greatest achievement would be our education programs?" he mused during one of our weekly dinners. "Now we're protecting every kind of charitable work imaginable. Your mother would be amazed." Aunt Victoria, who had become a fierce advocate for foundation security in her own right, had transformed her social network into a powerful force for change. The women who had once gathered for charity galas now led sophisticated oversight committees, ensuring that no other organization would fall victim to the kind of fraud Alexander had attempted. "The old guard resisted at first," she remarked during a board meeting. "They thought all this security would kill the spirit of philanthropy. Instead, it's made charitable giving stronger than ever. Donors give more because they trust more." Mia's FBI division had expanded into an international operation, working with law enforcement agencies worldwide to protect charitable organizations. The techniques we'd developed to expose Alexander's network had become standard training at Quantico, taught to new agents as a case study in modern financial crime prevention. Sarah Thompson, whose own foundation had risen from the ashes of Alexander's previous schemes, now ran the International Institute for Philanthropic Protection. "We're not just preventing fraud anymore," she explained at our annual conference. "We're changing the entire culture of charitable giving. Trust is no longer blind, it's verified, protected, and stronger for it." The Plaza Hotel, where my almost wedding had turned into a sting operation, had become something of a pilgrimage site for foundation leaders. They would visit the grand ballroom where it all happened, drawing inspiration from the place where one bride's courage had sparked a global revolution in charitable protection. Alexander himself had become a footnote in a much larger story. His prison confession, now required reading in business ethics courses worldwide, served as a warning about the vulnerability of charitable organizations and the importance of proper security measures. He would never be free again, but his story helped ensure that others like him would never succeed. The wedding dress that never made it down the aisle had found its own purpose. Displayed in the Smithsonian's exhibit on women's empowerment, it stood as a symbol of choosing truth over tradition, protection over pretense. Beside it, my mother's pearl earrings caught the light, reminding visitors that sometimes the most precious family legacies aren't the ones we inherit, but the ones we create. During a rare quiet moment in my office, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, I reflected on how completely life had transformed. The naive heiress who had almost married a fraud had become a global authority on charitable protection. The foundation that Alexander had targeted now led an international movement for transparency and security. "You know what the real miracle is?" Sarah said during one of our regular strategy sessions. "It's not just that we stopped the fraudsters. It's that we made charitable giving safer without making it colder. People still lead with their hearts. They just protect those hearts with their heads now." The impact rippled far beyond just financial protection. We'd created a new model of philanthropic leadership, one that balanced compassion with caution, trust with verification. Young foundation directors studied our case, learning not just how to prevent fraud, but how to build stronger, more resilient, charitable organizations. My father, who had initially struggled with the shock of Alexander's betrayal, now spoke proudly of how our foundation had evolved. "We thought we were just protecting money," he said during a board meeting, "but we were really protecting hope. Every dollar saved from fraud is a dollar that can change someone's life." The international charitable community had embraced our methods completely. The grant protocol wasn't just a security system anymore. It was a philosophy, a commitment to protecting the sacred trust between donors and charitable organizations. Our annual conferences drew thousands of participants from around the world, each committed to maintaining the integrity of philanthropic work. 7 years after that fateful wedding day, I stood in my office, holding the latest letter from another foundation saved by our protocols. Outside, rain fell softly on the Manhattan streets, but unlike the tears I might have shed as a bride, these drops felt like renewal, like validation of every choice that had led us here. Sometimes, I told a group of young foundation leaders during a mentoring session, the greatest love story isn't about finding the right partner. It's about finding the right purpose. What started as my revenge became everyone's protection. That's a legacy worth far more than any wedding could have given me. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the city. Somewhere, out there, countless lives were being changed by charitable organizations that could work freely, safely, protected by the systems we'd built from the ashes of betrayal. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. Not destroying one person's schemes, but protecting thousands of others' dreams. Life had come full circle, but the circle had widened far beyond anything I could have imagined on that wedding day 7 years ago. We had turned one moment of potential tragedy into a lifetime of positive change. And in the end, isn't that the best revenge of all? Best revenge